Linda Carter was 67 when she finally said out loud what so many adults over 55 quietly believe: "It's probably just my age. My mother had the same problem. My grandmother too. I guess it's inevitable." And that is the part that should worry us most. Not just the knee pain, not the weakness in the legs, not even that popping sound on the stairs, or that heavy, stiff feeling that never seems to fully go away. What should worry us most is how many people have already accepted those signs as a normal part of aging. Because weak knees and joint wear are not always just about age. In many cases, they reflect an internal environment that has been building inside the body for years, one that affects inflammation, tissue repair, and whether the body can actually use the nutrients meant to support the joints. When people begin to understand that, everything starts to look different. So tell me in the comments right now, have you also accepted knee pain or leg weakness as just part of getting older, yes or no? Because your answer says a lot about how many people are still missing the real cause of the problem. Now, before we get into the specific foods in this video, there is one thing you need to understand first. Taking collagen is not the same as rebuilding strong joints. The collagen you consume still has to be broken down, absorbed, and actually used by the body. And whether that happens depends less on how much you take and more on the internal environment receiving it. Think of it like a construction site. You can deliver the best materials every day, but if the site is blocked, flooded, or not functioning properly, those materials never become a strong structure. And that is exactly what happens in many aging knees. So subscribe to the channel right now and turn on the notification bell, because we're starting with the hidden reason collagen often fails and why your knees may not be getting the support they actually need. And let's start with what I consider the hidden root of all joint weakness. This is the topic that most frequently provokes a reaction of genuine surprise in people dealing with knee pain and leg weakness, because most have already tried some form of collagen, glucosamine, or chondroitin supplementation, often for months or years without satisfactory results. And when I ask whether anyone ever explained why the supplement wasn't working, the answer is almost always no. The standard explanation they receive is that they need more time, a different brand, or a higher dose, when in reality the problem is not the supplement itself, but the internal metabolic environment that is blocking the utilization of the incoming nutrients. The process at the root of this blockage has a technical name that I will explain in a completely understandable way: glycation. When blood glucose levels are chronically elevated, which happens in people with insulin resistance, diets high in refined carbohydrates and sugars, or simply eating habits that create repeated blood sugar spikes throughout the day, sugar molecules literally bind to collagen proteins in a spontaneous and progressive process that compromises the structure and function of those proteins. The result is compounds called advanced glycation end products, known by the acronym AGS, which not coincidentally spells ages. These compounds stiffen tendons, compromise cartilage elasticity, and drastically reduce the joint's ability to absorb impacts. Think of the collagen fibers in your joints as mattress springs designed to be elastic and resilient. Now imagine someone poured thick syrup over those springs. Over time, the syrup dries, the springs become stiff, brittle, and at the first intense impact, they break. This is exactly what glycation does to joint collagen. And while this process is active, any collagen you ingest will meet the same fate as the endogenous collagen already there: progressive stiffness and loss of function. The second mechanism by which the metabolic environment compromises joint health involves enzymes called metalloproteinases, which under normal conditions are balanced with the body's repair hormones, but in a context of chronic low-grade inflammation, win the battle and begin degrading collagen faster than the body can produce it. Chronic low-grade inflammation, the kind that doesn't cause a fever or noticeable acute pain but silently erodes tissues over months and years, is fueled by insulin resistance, excess visceral fat diets, rich in ultra-processed foods, and imbalances in the gut microbiota that create increased intestinal permeability. When the gut is permeable or leaky, bacterial fragments and undigested proteins enter the bloodstream and activate immune responses that translate into low-grade systemic inflammation, affecting all tissues, including joint tissues that depend on an anti-inflammatory environment to carry out their maintenance and regeneration processes. In Linda Carter's case, when her blood tests from the previous 2 years were reviewed, a clear pattern appeared immediately. Elevated fasting insulin, despite still normal fasting, blood glucose triglycerides over 150 low HDL, and slightly elevated C-reactive protein. This set of markers precisely describes the metabolic environment that was blocking the utilization of the collagen she was taking, and fueling the inflammation that kept her knees sore and weak, despite all the efforts she had made to solve the problem through the conventional means she had been advised to use. The solution to this metabolic blockage does not start with a different supplement or a higher dose of the same supplement. It starts with specific dietary changes that reduce the glycemic load, especially at night when the body should be in maximum repair mode. When you consume refined sugars or flours before bed, you raise insulin exactly when the body should be secreting growth hormone in concentrations that are essentially incompatible with high insulin levels. And growth hormone is one of the main signals that instructs fibroblasts, the cells responsible for collagen production, to do their maintenance and repair work during sleep hours. Reducing the nighttime glycemic load, eliminating refined carbohydrates and sugars in the last 2 to 3 hours before bed, is one of the interventions with the greatest impact on the quality of joint regeneration that happens during sleep, and it is a change that requires no additional product, no cost, and no radical transformation of your routine. The other fundamental intervention to clear the metabolic environment is to promote the process of autophagy, the cellular cleanup mechanism where the body identifies damaged and glycated collagen proteins, recycles them, and converts them into materials for producing new tissue. Autophagy is activated by periods of relative fasting, moderate exercise, and the reduction of insulin spikes. This means the same changes that reduce glycation also activate the cleanup of the damage glycation has already caused, creating a virtuous cycle where the improved metabolic environment allows damaged joint tissue to be gradually replaced by functional new tissue. Now that we understand how to clear the metabolic ground so collagen can be used, we need to talk about the specific building materials the body needs to reconstitute joint tissue in a functional and lasting way. And the first of these is a mineral that rarely appears in discussions about joint health despite being documented by physiology as absolutely essential for the structural integrity of collagen. I am talking about organic silicon or silica, and the food I consider one of the most underrated and accessible sources of this mineral available in the American diet is chayote, also known as Merleton squash or choco. Before explaining why chayote is so relevant to the health of your knees, I need you to understand the specific role silicon plays in collagen structure, because without this understanding, the recommendation seems arbitrary, when in fact it is mechanistically precise. The collagen fibers that make up cartilage, tendons and ligaments are not simply parallel independent protein filaments. They need to be cross-linked, connected to each other at multiple points through bonds that create a three-dimensional network that is much stronger and much more resilient than any individual filament could be. Think of collagen fibers as large steel beams meant to support a bridge. You can have the beams on the ground, but without the bolts and welds that connect them to each other at specific angles, the bridge will collapse under the first weight it has to bear. Silicon is exactly the element that allows this cross-linking. It acts as a cofactor for the enzymes that form the bonds between collagen and elastin fibers, creating the three-dimensional network that gives connective tissue the strength and elasticity needed to withstand decades of daily use. Without enough silicon, the collagen the body produces is qualitatively inferior. The fibers are weaker, more prone to micro tears, and less able to recover from the normal impacts of movement. Chayote is one of the most concentrated plant sources of organic silicon, the form of silicon that the human body absorbs and utilizes with much greater efficiency than the inorganic silicon found in conventional supplements. But chayote's benefits for joint health don't stop at silicon, and it is this multiplicity of mechanisms that makes it so valuable in a nutritional approach focused on the knees. Chayote is also a significant source of manganese, a mineral that in joint physiology acts as a necessary cofactor for the activation of the enzymes that synthesize proteoglycans. Proteoglycans are molecules that function like tiny sponges inside the cartilage. They attract and hold water within the cartilaginous matrix, keeping the cartilage hydrated and able to function as the natural shock absorber it should be between the bone surfaces that articulate in the knee. When the cartilage loses its ability to hold water, which happens when proteoglycan synthesis is compromised by a manganese deficit, chronic inflammation, or the glycation process we discussed earlier, it loses thickness, loses its ability to absorb impact, and the bone surfaces begin to get closer, generating the friction that manifests as that characteristic popping sound when bending the knee and as pain that progressively worsens with use. Linda Carter described exactly this pattern, the popping that had started 2 years earlier, followed by discomfort that evolved into real pain, limiting her ability to climb stairs and walk for extended periods. When chayote was incorporated into her diet 3 to 4 times a week, combined with the other interventions we will discuss, the improvement in joint comfort she reported in the following weeks made precise physiological sense. It's not a placebo, it's silicon and manganese reaching the places where the collagen and proteoglycan synthesis enzymes need them to work. What makes chayote especially valuable in the context of a dietary approach to joint health compared to other foods that also provide silicon and manganese is its extraordinarily low glycemic load. Unlike many nutrient-rich fruits and vegetables that come with significant amounts of fructose, which can contribute to glycation and liver overload, which we'll discuss in a later topic. Chayote provides its structural minerals without creating the insulin spike that would block the utilization of those same minerals in the joints. It is a vehicle for joint health that respects metabolism instead of contradicting it, making it compatible with exactly the metabolic profile that most frequently needs nutritional intervention for knee health. The most efficient way to consume chayote to maximize silicon availability is lightly steamed, which preserves the minerals without the losses that happen with prolonged boiling, when water-soluble minerals dissolve into the cooking liquid that is then discarded. Consumed raw in green juices, it is equally effective and allows for faster absorption of the minerals, especially useful when chayote is consumed 30 to 40 minutes before a light exercise session, taking advantage of the increased joint blood flow that movement produces to maximize the delivery of nutrients to the cartilage tissue. 3 to 4 servings a week is the frequency I recommend for people with active joint impairment. And the combination with the other foods I will present in the upcoming topics creates a nutritional synergy that is significantly more powerful than any of these foods would produce in isolation. If silicon is the bolt that joins collagen fibers into a structurally solid network, vitamin C is the switch that turns on all the machinery to produce that network. And without it, none of the other nutrients we are discussing can fully perform their role. There is a very widespread misconception about vitamin C that needs to be corrected right away. Most people associate it exclusively with immunity preventing colds and supplementing during flu season. This association is not wrong. Vitamin C indeed plays a central role in immune function, but it captures only a fraction of what this nutrient does inside the body and completely ignores its role in joint physiology, which is perhaps even more clinically relevant for older adults than immune support. Vitamin C is a mandatory cofactor for an enzyme called prolyl hydroxylase, and without getting into biochemical details that would make the explanation inaccessible. What this means in practice is that the human body is biologically incapable of producing a single stable collagen fiber without available ascorbic acid. Prolyl hydroxylase uses vitamin C to make post-translational modifications to collagen chains that are absolutely necessary for the 3 amino acid chains to intertwine into the triple helical structure that is the functional and resilient form of collagen. That same structure gives articular cartilage its shock-absorbing capacity and tendons their tensile strength. Without enough vitamin C, the collagen chains the body tries to produce simply cannot stabilize. They fall apart before becoming functional fibers like a knot that comes undone because it lacks the glue that should seal it. What medical research has consistently documented, and which has direct implications for the joint health of older American adults, is that even with enough vitamin C levels to prevent scurvy, the classic severe deficiency disease, many people live in a state of subclinical deficiency that preferentially affects tissues with a higher metabolic demand for vitamin C. And the most demanding joints, especially the knees, which bear the body's weight with every step and every change of direction, are consistently among the first tissues to be affected by this subclinical deficiency, simply because they are the tissues that most demand continuous collagen synthesis to compensate for daily mechanical wear and tear. There is an additional factor that amplifies this problem in older adults and is rarely considered in the nutritional advice they receive. Chronic stress dramatically depletes vitamin C reserves. The adrenal gland responsible for producing cortisol in response to stress contains one of the highest concentrations of vitamin C of any tissue in the human body and uses this nutrient in massive amounts to sustain cortisol production. In people living under moderate to high chronic stress, which describes an alarming proportion of Americans over 55 dealing with combinations of financial worries, the health of spouses or aging parents, life transitions, and social isolation. The adrenal demand for vitamin C may be competing directly with joint demand depriving fibroblasts of the substrate they need to keep collagen synthesis at an adequate pace to compensate for wear. Linda Carter had spent the previous 2 years caring for her husband with a debilitating chronic condition, a period of intense chronic stress, which when considered in the context of the vitamin C depletion we were discussing, explained a significant part of the accelerated joint wear she had experienced during exactly that period. The correct way to use citrus fruits to maximize joint benefits, and here is the mistake most people make, is not to consume large volumes of industrialized orange juice or even processed natural juice, but rather the whole fruit or low glycemic impact forms like real lemon juice and kiwi. When you remove the fiber from the fruit and consume only the liquid, the fructose spike that reaches the liver is immediate and significant. And this hepatic fructose spike, as we will discuss in the topic on the liver, compromises exactly the metabolic processes that need to be working well for the vitamin C you just ingested to be effectively utilized in collagen synthesis. The whole fruit with all its fiber allows for gradual and controlled absorption that prevents the glycemic spike and keeps vitamin C available in a sustained manner over hours instead of minutes. The protocol I recommend, based on the mechanisms we've described, is to consume a low glycemic vitamin C source, lemon, kiwi, strawberries or berries, approximately 30 minutes before any leg strengthening exercise. because the increased joint blood flow that exercise produces creates a window of opportunity where circulating nutrients reach the cartilage tissue much more efficiently than at rest. This combination of available vitamin C at the moment joint blood flow is maximized is one of the most efficient ways to ensure that the fibroblasts inside the joint have the necessary substrate to initiate cycles of collagen synthesis that will gradually rebuild the quality of the joint tissue over weeks and months of consistency. We have reached the third fundamental component of the joint reconstruction system, and this is the one that most frequently surprises people. Because sulfur is not a nutrient that appears in popular discussions about joint health with the frequency its physiological importance would justify. When most people think of sulfur, they think of something industrial, the smell of rotten eggs, something that certainly has no relation to knee health. But organic sulfur present in specific amino acids found in accessible and common foods is literally the cement that holds collagen fibers together in a structure capable of supporting the weight and impacts that joints face every day. Let me explain the mechanism with the precision it deserves. The collagen fibers that silicon and vitamin C help produce are at that stage like parallel ropes, individually strong, but they would slide over each other at the first lateral force if there wasn't something connecting them crosswise. In biochemistry, these cross connections are called disulfide bonds or bridges, and as the name reveals, they are formed by two sulfur atoms chemically binding together, creating an anchor between adjacent collagen fibers. Without these disulfide bonds, joint collagen has no structural integrity. It is like a brick wall, with no mortar between the bricks, which looks solid when static, but crumbles at the first impact. The amino acids that provide the necessary sulfur for these bonds are mainly cysteine and methionine, present in high-quality proteins like eggs, meat, fish, and poultry. But the issue that frequently goes unnoticed is that the availability of these amino acids to the joints depends not only on how much you consume them, but on how efficiently your digestive system releases them from the proteins that contain them and absorbs them into the bloodstream. This is where papaya comes in as a nutritional ally that goes far beyond what most people imagine when they think of this tropical fruit. Papaya contains a proteolytic enzyme called papain, and the role of papain in joint health is a mechanism very few doctors explain clearly, but one that has significant practical implications for anyone trying to reconstitute joint tissue through nutrition. The problem affecting a surprisingly large proportion of American adults over 55 is that they are not absorbing the high-quality proteins they consume efficiently enough for sulfur-containing amino acids to reach the joints in the concentrations needed to support collagen synthesis. This happens because the production of hydrochloric acid by the stomach, essential for activating the proteolytic enzymes that break proteins down into absorbable amino acids, progressively decreases with age. This process, called hypochlorhydria, affects an increasing proportion of the population as they age, but is rarely investigated clinically because it doesn't cause dramatic symptoms that send people to the doctor. The result is that the high-quality proteins you consume, thinking you are providing the body with the amino acids the joints need, are only being partially digested. Incompletely broken down protein fragments reach the small intestine where they cannot be absorbed. They ferment, cause digestive discomfort that is attributed to other causes, and the sulfur-containing amino acids that were supposed to rebuild joint collagen simply do not reach their destination. Papain from papaya acts as a digestion assistant that pre-digests proteins, working in sync with the body's digestive enzymes to ensure the breakdown of protein chains into amino acids is complete and efficient, maximizing the amount of cysteine and methionine that actually enters the bloodstream and becomes available to joint fibroblasts. Bromelain from pineapple, another proteolytic enzyme with a mechanism similar to papain, offers additional specifically anti-inflammatory benefits that complement the digestive role of papaya enzymes. Bromelain has demonstrated in multiple studies the ability to modulate the joint inflammatory response by inhibiting inflammatory signaling pathways that are exactly among the mechanisms fueling pain and progressive damage in an arthritic knee. The combination of papaya and pineapple, consumed preferably on an empty stomach or 30 minutes before protein-rich meals, creates an optimized digestive environment where the efficiency of protein digestion is maximized. Sulfur-containing amino acids are absorbed more efficiently, and the joint inflammatory load is reduced by the direct action of the enzymes on the signaling pathways that sustain chronic inflammation. For Linda Carter, the incorporation of fresh papaya 4 times a week at breakfast before the protein meals she regularly ate was one of the changes she described as producing the most noticeable effect in terms of overall digestive comfort, which she in turn noted was correlated with an improvement in joint comfort in the following weeks. This correlation is no coincidence. It is the clinical expression of a real physiological mechanism where improved protein digestion increased the availability of sulfur-containing amino acids for the collagen synthesis processes that were limited not by a lack of protein in the diet, but by insufficient absorption of the protein being consumed. This is the topic that most consistently surprises people, because the idea that the liver has a direct connection to knee health seems at first glance unlikely. The liver is in the abdomen, the knees are in the legs. Conventional medicine often treats these two regions as completely separate domains with completely different specialists. The gastroenterologist cares for the liver, the orthopedic surgeon cares for the knee, and there is rarely a conversation between these specialists about how liver function affects joint health in ways that are clinically documented and physiologically understandable. But in functional medicine, where the goal is to understand the organism as an integrated system rather than a collection of independent parts, the connection between the liver and the knees is one of the most important and consequential that exists, especially for adults over 55, whose livers frequently accumulate decades of exposure to inadequate diets, medications, alcohol and environmental toxins that progressively compromise their ability to perform functions that have a direct impact on joint regeneration. Let me explain the central mechanism. The liver is the organ responsible for producing transport proteins like albumin, which carries nutrients, hormones, and bioactive compounds through the bloodstream to the tissues where they are needed. And it is also the site where insulin-like growth factor 1, known by the acronym IGF-1, is produced in response to growth hormone released by the pituitary gland. IGF-1 is one of the most important hormonal signals the body uses to instruct chondrocytes, the cells that inhabit articular cartilage, and fibroblasts to carry out their synthesis and repair cycles. Without adequate IGF-1, joint cells simply do not receive the signal they need to initiate the regeneration processes that keep cartilage healthy and functional over time. When the liver is compromised, whether by fatty liver disease, even if mild and asymptomatic by excess fructose from industrialized juices and refined sugars, or by an accumulation of toxins, the organ is trying to process, IGF-1 production drops measurably. In a state of moderate liver impairment, which affects an alarmingly high proportion of adult Americans without their knowledge, because mild fatty liver rarely causes noticeable symptoms. The liver prioritizes immediate vital functions: detoxification, production of clotting factors, and energy metabolism, and pushes the production of growth and repair signals like IGF-1 to the back of the line. The result is that the joints are left in an insufficient maintenance mode. Wear and tear continues at the normal rate dictated by the mechanics of movement, but the repair signal that should compensate for this wear at night and during rest periods is reduced. This creates a progressive deficit of joint tissue that manifests clinically as the weakness, stiffness, and pain that Linda Carter had experienced for 2 years without ever receiving an explanation that connected the state of her liver to the deterioration of her knees. The liver is also the organ where vitamin D, essential for bone and joint health and for modulating the immune response that prevents the immune system from attacking the body's own joint tissue, undergoes its first stage of activation before being converted into its biologically active form by the kidneys. A compromised liver converts vitamin D less efficiently, meaning that even people who supplement vitamin D adequately may see reduced benefits if liver function is impaired, because the form they are supplementing is not being activated with the efficiency needed to produce the expected effects. To support liver function through nutrition in a way that frees up the liver's capacity to resume its role as the manager of joint regeneration. The most effective foods are those that provide compounds supporting the two phases of liver detoxification. Phase 1 is where fat-soluble toxins are converted into intermediate compounds. Phase 2 is where these intermediates are conjugated with water-soluble molecules for elimination. Fruits rich in anthocyanins, berries, blackberries, blueberries, and dark grapes provide compounds that specifically support Phase 2 of liver detoxification and simultaneously have documented anti-inflammatory properties that directly benefit joint tissue. Grapefruit contains naringenin, a flavonoid, with significant hepatoprotective and anti-inflammatory properties, with the important caveat that it interacts with a large number of prescription medications metabolized by the CYP3A4 enzyme in the liver. Therefore, anyone taking medications must check with their doctor to see if grapefruit is compatible with their therapeutic regimen before incorporating it regularly. The most common mistake I see, and one that needs to be stated clearly, is the consumption of fruit juices while thinking they are healthy for the joints and the liver, when in reality, the removal of fiber and the concentration of fructose that characterize juices, even natural ones, creates exactly the liver overload we are trying to avoid. When you remove the fiber from the fruit and consume only the liquid, the fructose hit reaches the liver immediately and in concentrated form, activating hepatic de novo lipogenesis, the conversion of fructose into fat inside the liver, which is the very process that contributes to fatty liver and compromises IGF-1 and other joint regeneration signals. Whole fruit with all its fiber is the only format that ensures hepatoprotective and anti-inflammatory compounds reach the liver without the fructose overload that contradicts the benefit you are trying to obtain. We have reached the final topic, and this is the one that transforms everything we discussed earlier from theoretical knowledge into measurable practical results. Because there is a dimension of joint nutrition that rarely appears in discussions about foods and supplements for the knees, and it is clinically just as important as the nutrients themselves. Timing. The moment you consume these nutrients in relation to physical movement. Understanding this requires knowing why articular cartilage has a biology of nutrient absorption completely different from any other tissue in the body. Cartilage is an extraordinary tissue, yet challenging from a nutritional standpoint. And understanding what makes it challenging is what allows you to develop an eating and movement protocol that actually works to rebuild it over time. Unlike practically all other tissues in the human body, articular cartilage has no direct blood supply. There are no blood capillaries inside the cartilaginous tissue that can deliver nutrients directly to the cells inhabiting that tissue. Chondrocytes, the cells responsible for synthesizing and maintaining collagen and cartilaginous proteoglycans, receive their nutrients via a process of diffusion through the synovial fluid that bathes the joint. The synovial fluid functions as the transport medium for all nutrients reaching the cartilage, and the renewal of this fluid, which is what ensures fresh nutrients arrive and metabolic waste leaves, fundamentally depends on joint movement. It is the rhythmic compression and decompression of a joint during movement that acts like a pump, squeezing the waste-laden synovial fluid out of the cartilage and allowing fresh, nutrient-rich fluid to enter, exactly like squeezing a sponge submerged in clean water to renew the liquid inside it. The practical implication of this diffusion nutrition mechanism is that the timing between the ingestion of the joint nutrients we discussed throughout this video and physical movement is not a secondary detail. It is a central component of the nutritional protocol's efficacy. When you consume Chayote citrus fruits, papaya, or any other food providing the collagen precursors, we discussed these nutrients enter the bloodstream and remain available for a period of time that varies depending on the food and how it was prepared. The window of maximum concentration of these nutrients in the bloodstream when they are available in the greatest amount to be incorporated into the synovial fluid and from there diffused into the cartilage is the ideal time to create the joint movement stimulus that will trigger the diffusion pump and maximize the delivery of these nutrients to the chondrocytes that will use them in the synthesis of collagen and proteoglycans. The practical recommendation derived from this understanding is to consume sources of collagen precursors approximately 30 to 40 minutes before performing leg strengthening exercises. Enough time for initial digestion to occur and nutrients to begin appearing in the bloodstream, coinciding with the peak in joint blood flow that exercise produces. For people with significant joint impairment, like Linda Carter in the first weeks of the protocol, the most appropriate exercises are not high-impact ones, which can aggravate inflammation and damage in already compromised joints, but isometric and low-impact exercises that produce joint compression and decompression without the mechanical trauma that the impacts of running or jumping would impose on a weakened knee. Isometric exercises where the muscle is contracted without apparent joint movement, such as doing a wall sit while keeping the knees at a 90-degree angle for 20 to 30 seconds, are especially effective in this context because they intensely activate the periarticular musculature of the knee, especially the quadriceps and hamstrings, without creating the impact that would aggravate existing joint inflammation. Stronger periarticular muscles reduce the direct load on the joint surface by absorbing part of the impacts that would otherwise be transmitted directly to the cartilage, functioning as muscular shock absorbers that mechanically protect the joint, while the nutritional protocol works to reconstitute the cartilaginous tissue from the inside out. A light 15 to 20-minute walk after meals, which has the added benefit of reducing the postprandial glycemic spikes we discussed in the context of glycation, also activates the synovial diffusion pump sufficiently to improve cartilaginous nutrition without imposing excessive mechanical stress. For Linda Carter, combining the dietary protocol with these low-impact exercises performed 30 to 40 minutes after consuming collagen precursor foods produced an improvement that she described at her 6-week follow-up as the most significant she had experienced in 2 years of trying supplements and medications. Not because the protocol is magic, but because it simultaneously addressed the multiple mechanisms that were blocking joint regeneration instead of trying to compensate for only one of them at a time. Consistency over weeks and months is the factor that determines whether initial improvements consolidate into lasting joint recovery, and that is why the simplicity of the protocol is a value in itself, because complex protocols are rarely maintained with the consistency that produces real results. I want to return to Linda Carter one last time, not to revisit her initial diagnosis or the protocol she followed, but to tell you what happened at the 3-month follow-up used to evaluate her progress. She came in differently than the first time, not just physically, although the difference in how she walked was noticeable, but with a posture and energy that communicated something I have learned to recognize over the years as far more valuable than any number on a lab report. It was the posture of a person who had regained agency over her own health, who had stopped being a passive recipient of symptom management and had become an active participant in the process of rebuilding her own body. She said that the stairs she had avoided for over a year were accessible again, that the morning stiffness she had normalized as a part of aging had decreased to the point that she noticed the difference every day when she woke up, and that she had gradually stopped taking the anti-inflammatory she had used for 2 years under medical guidance because she simply reached a point where she no longer needed it to function day to day. None of these improvements happened because a magic supplement was discovered or because of a new pharmacological intervention. They happened because the mechanisms that had been blocking what her body was biologically capable of doing were addressed systematically. The metabolic environment of glycation that was trapping collagen was cleared. The silicon from Chayote that allowed the cross-linking of fibers was provided. Synthesis was activated with vitamin C from citrus. Efficient digestion was supported with papaya enzymes. The liver was freed to produce hormonal regeneration signals, and movement was used at the right time to deliver these nutrients exactly where the cartilage needed them. The human body has a regenerative capacity that consistently surprises even those who have spent years studying physiology. What it needs is not to be forced to function with external interventions that compensate for dysfunctions. It needs the obstacles removed so it can do what it was designed to do. The message I want you to take away from this video is concrete and implementable starting today, not perfectly, not with a radical transformation of your routine that is rarely sustained, but with gradual and consistent changes that produce noticeable improvements over weeks and real transformations over months. Start this week with 2 simple gestures. First, incorporate Chayote 3 to 4 times a week, steamed raw in green juices or in salads, and include a low-glycemic source of vitamin C like lemon kiwi or berries, consumed 30 to 40 minutes before any physical activity you do. Second, eliminate or drastically reduce refined carbohydrates and sugars in the last 2 hours before bed. Not as a permanent absolute sacrifice, but as a 2-week experiment where you observe what happens to morning knee stiffness, sleep quality, and energy upon waking. Third, replace any fruit juice, even natural juice, with whole fruit, and observe the impact of this specific change on how you feel throughout the day. And fourth, incorporate fresh papaya or pineapple before protein meals to maximize the digestion and absorption of the sulfur-containing amino acids your joints need for collagen synthesis. These are not changes that require significant time, money, or special equipment. They are pattern changes that anyone can implement with what already exists in their dietary routine, and which over 6 to 8 weeks of consistency produce improvements that follow-up evaluations can objectively document. Now, I genuinely want to hear from you, and I ask these questions with the real interest of someone who has spent years understanding how people relate to joint health and aging. 3 questions to answer in the comments right now. First, what data point surprised you the most in this video? The connection between the liver and the knees, the role of Chayote silicon in cross-linking collagen fibers, the glycation mechanism that traps collagen even when you supplement, or the timing between eating and movement that determines whether nutrients actually reach the cartilage. Tell me, because your answer helps me understand what people actually know about joint health and what still needs to be communicated more clearly and more frequently. Second, have you tried collagen supplements without seeing results? And do you now understand why that happened based on what we discussed today? Tell me your experience. Because the story of someone else who is in the same situation and found clarity on what was blocking their results could be exactly what someone watching needs to hear to persist instead of giving up. And third, where are you watching from? City, state, country? I am always genuinely amazed by the diversity of places people come from to reach this channel, and this information helps me understand the community we are building here and what needs to be explored more deeply in upcoming videos. If this video helped you see your knee pain in a new way, please share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe to Senior Meal Coach. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss practical science-based tips to help you stay strong, steady, and independent for years to come.